So one day after looking at Pete Carroll's coaching staff, we actually officially get the updated list of Pete Carroll's coaching staff. We'll go over that, plus we'll take our first deep dive into a few mock drafts. That plus more on Wednesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for February 12th, 2025.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Definitely appreciate you wherever you're catching the show, wherever you find your favorite podcast, or you're checking us out on the YouTube page. Either way is great by us, and we appreciate it. Even in the offseason, the show continues to grow, and that's because of you, Raider Nation, and because of the job that my man Ari does behind the scenes on the YouTube page. We definitely appreciate him. Fantastic job. Takes a lot of pride in his work, and we can appreciate that. Commitment to excellence, right? That's what my man Ari has. So you can hit him up, check him out. He's on Twitter at Ari Produces. You can hit me up as well at your boy Q254. And, of course, we got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line if you want to be a part of the show, 707-654-4693. And we've got a ton of feedback. Been getting a lot of calls and a lot of texts, and I do appreciate that. That lets me know that you're heavily invested in this Raiders offseason. And, well, you should be, because there's a lot going on this offseason, as it has been, well, just about each and every offseason for the longest, right? So this is going to be no different than others. This is going to be a very important offseason, and, well, you're reacting accordingly with all the calls and texts. We'll get that coming up. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, your calls and texts. Again, 707-654-4693. Now that the Super Bowl is officially in the books, it is the offseason for all 32 teams around the league. So we're going to take a look at 3 different guys that I really respect when it comes to draft analysts and, guys that do these mock drafts for a living and study this thing all year long. And that's what it's become, an all-year thing when it comes to the NFL draft. We're going to take a look at 3 of them, Field Yates and Matt Miller, both from ESPN, and Daniel Jeremiah from NFL Network. We'll take a look at those mock drafts and just the top 6 picks. And basically talking about who or what the Raiders really could be in line for coming up at the end of April. That'll be segment number 2. Here in segment number 1, yeah, you guessed it. We'll go over the Raiders coaching staff. Now that we got the whole thing, if you're watching on YouTube, I got this whole book. It's like the Bible. It's so big and so thick, about 5 or 6 pages long, just of coaches and their descriptions. We'll go over it pretty quickly here in segment number 1. Matter of fact, let's go ahead and jump right into it. It's pretty wild. All I had to do was wait one day. If I waited one more day, I would have got this list instead of going over it and trying to, break down all the coaches that I found and saw reported last week that were added to Pete Carroll's staff. All I had to do was wait one more day, and it would have all been in my hand. But that's how things go. I've never been, called a patient guy very often. So there you go. But we'll go over this pretty quickly. And at some point, we'll go over descriptions of these different guys. But it would take a whole show for me to go over all the descriptions that the Raiders sent over. But here we go. Head coach Pete Carroll, we know that. Senior vice president, coaching operations, Matt Capiro. He's a guy that we talked about earlier in the offseason. So those are the top 2 guys. No Marvin Lewis. Remember I talked about it on Tuesday's show? Surprised that Marvin Lewis was retained as the assistant head coach. Well, I was surprised because, well, he isn't. So no Marvin Lewis. He's not on the staff. Offensive coordinator Chip Kelly. Wide receivers coach is Chris Beatty. Senior offensive assistant is Bob Bicknell. Sean Binkus, offensive assistant, he actually comes from Ohio State, so clearly he's coming over on the Chip Kelly staff, part of that. Brennan Carroll, Pete Carroll's son, he is the run game coordinator, offensive line coach. Nate Carroll, also Pete Carroll's son, assistant quarterbacks coach. Andy Dickerson, assistant offensive line coach. I've heard a lot of really good things about Andy Dickerson. I'm not going to act like I know all these guys. I'm not going to try to gas you up like that, but I have heard some really good things about him. I'm going to do a deep dive on my radio show, Unnecessary Roughness, on Raider Nation Radio 920, into a few of these guys. So if I get some good intel back on Andy Dickerson or any intel, I'll bring it to the show. Kyle Fuller, offensive quality control coach. He's on the Raiders staff. Dylan McCullough, running backs coach. Greg Olson, talked about him yesterday, quarterbacks coach, 3rd time's the charm. Joe Philbin, he ended the season as the interim offensive line coach for the Raiders. He's the senior offensive assistant. So really good that Joe Philbin, in my opinion, is sticking around because Brendan Carroll is the offensive line coach and the run game coordinator. And that's a big, tall task for a guy in the NFL. So if things don't go well, if things isn't like starting to click for Brendan Carroll as that offensive line coach, he can lean on Joe Philbin, who has tons of respect and tons of experience as the offensive line coach. So Joe Philbin being on the staff, I think means a lot for the Raiders moving forward. Luke Steckel, tight ends coach, he returns. On the defensive side of things, Patrick Graham, defensive coordinator, talked about him. John Glenn, the linebackers coach, again, glowing reviews about him, excited about what he brings to the table. Kenyon Jackson, assistant defensive line coach. Robbie Leonard, another guy very excited about, the run game coordinator, defensive line coach. He's the guy who's been getting the most out of guys, even when they're injured, right? Even when they're guys that don't necessarily think that they're going to play a big role on the defense, he's been able to get a lot out of them. So it's great to see Robbie Leonard return to the defensive line. Ty McKenzie, defensive assistant and linebackers coach. B.R. Rasul, defensive quality control. Marcus Robertson, he was back with the Raiders in Oakland. Defensive backs coach. Rip Rowan, defensive assistant. And Joe Woods, passing game coordinator, defensive backs. He's been a DC in the National Football League for quite a while. And then special teams, Tom McMahon, he returns. Cade Rannings is the quality control special teams coach. And Darius Swinton, special teams assistant. The only part of the team that I don't have an update on is the strength and conditioning, right? Like AJ Nibel has been that guy. Obviously, Deuce Gruden was on that staff as well. I don't know about that. That's the only part of the coaching staff that has not been sent out or confirmed of who they are. I've seen reports that Deuce Gruden is still on it, but I don't know. I don't know that for a fact. I've seen AJ Nibel around town, and I don't know if he's still the strength and conditioning coach or not. But we'll find out about that sooner rather than later. I would assume that, that's already been decided just because they did put out an official release of all the coaches. But again, that would just be an assumption. And well, I had an assumption yesterday and it didn't really work out the way that I expected. Again, just waited one more day. All I had to do was, just exercise patience one more day and I would have been fine. That happens to me all the time. What did Dave Chappelle? Never mind, I'm not going to go there. There's a family show. But still, I was so frustrated because I even said it on the show. I was like, any day now, we're going to get an email release, and it's going to have descriptions on everybody. It's going to tell us what they do, where they came from, everything. And we did. Again, it's right here. It's 5 pages long, and I'm going to have it with me. So if there's any of those guys that I just talked about that you want to know anything about, feel free to ask me. I'll go ahead and, again, scroll through this big old book and let you know exactly who they are and where they came from. I mean, this is just pretty stinking lengthy. Like matter of fact, how about this one? I mentioned Kyle Fuller, offensive quality control. Why did I pick him out? Because I thought I knew exactly who Kyle Fuller was. And as I read through this, I do. He enters his first season in the NFL coaching ranks after serving as an assistant offensive line coach at Appalachian State University in 2024 after 1 season as a graduate assistant at the University of North Carolina. He played 5 seasons as a guard in the NFL for the Texans, Washington, and Seattle Seahawks. This is where I know him. He played collegiately at, you guessed it, Baylor from 2012 to 2016, where he's a 3-year starter on the offensive line, was named 2-time All Big 12 selection. So when I go through this list and I see Kyle Fuller, offensive quality control, immediately I thought of the Kyle Fuller that went to Baylor, and I thought, that's probably not him. Well, then as I go through this almanac, I find out, yeah, it is him. So he was, I believe, on the Art Briles teams that Art Briles helped win the Big 12 with there when he was there at Baylor. But yeah, Kyle Fuller, it's so funny seeing that name on there and realizing, yep, I covered him while he was playing at Baylor University. So there you go. I've got a whole almanac on all these guys. But like I said, I could do a whole show and it would take 3 segments. Matter of fact, it might take 4 segments to get through all these and break down every single one of these guys. But there you go. That's the coaching staff, everyone except for strength and conditioning. So hopefully we'll get that sooner rather than later. Coming up in segment number 2, what are the draft analysts saying about April's draft when it comes to the top 6 picks, with the Raiders having pick number 6? Field Yates, Matt Miller, Daniel Jeremiah, you'll hear what they have to think or what they have to say, who they've mocked, coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, do want to tell you about one of the great sponsors here on the show, and that is FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place to get into it than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And man, it's funny to think that all eyes are on the NBA and college hoops at this stage of the game, with the NFL now being officially over because of Super Bowl 59. Who's going to have the bigger impact? Luka with the Lakers, Jimmy Butler with the Warriors, or other? Well, we'll find out sooner rather than later. But with FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you missed the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Now that the Super Bowl is game, set, match, it's over. The Eagles are champs, and we all know that it's the offseason for all 32 teams. Now it's time to start looking into the draft, right? The combine's right around the corner. Obviously, pro days are going to be happening. We know free agency is going to be popping up sooner rather than later. We talked about that on Tuesday's show about some defensive free agents that the Raiders need to retain, but all eyes and all focus are really going to be on the NFL draft. And they've been there for a while, scatter shooting throughout the course of the regular season. But I kept cautioning that, hey, there's going to be a time where we're going to do so much heavy lifting when it comes to the draft that you're going to be draft out. Like, you're going to be so exhausted and tired of the draft by the time it comes up at the end of April. So that's why I like to slow play my way to the draft. I don't like to go ahead and, fire all those slugs off at one time. But now it's officially the offseason. So I want to take a look at 3 guys that I really respect when it comes to the NFL draft and the way that they do their mock drafts. One's Field Yates from ESPN, another Matt Miller from ESPN, been rocking with him for a long time. And, of course, DJ, Daniel Jeremiah from the NFL Network. Now, we all know I'm a big Mel Kiper Jr. guy as well. We'll obviously get his thoughts in at some stage of the game. And, yes, I'll hit you with the Mel Kiper Jr. Some will hate it, some will love it. It just kind of is what it is. But I'm excited about this draft. I'm excited about every draft. I love the draft. It's one of my favorite events of the year. I actually enjoy the draft more than I enjoy the Super Bowl. And that's because you see 32 fan bases get excited and feel like their team got better, where when you see the Super Bowl, only 1 or 2 teams is going to be happy, right? The other fan base is going to be upset. The other fan base can be super happy. And then there's going to be 30 other teams that are going to wish they were them. So that's why I enjoy the draft and even the process leading up to it. And I like to think I have a pretty good idea of how things go when it comes to the draft. With that being said, Field Yates from ESPN, we'll start with him. He put out his mock draft on yesterday, February 11th. And so we'll start with him because it's the newest one. And what I'm excited about when it comes to the Raiders, even though they're picking at number 6, and even though this draft is not deep when it comes to franchise quarterbacks, we know that. At 6, you're guaranteed, if you do this right, you're guaranteed to get a really good player. Whatever direction you go, defense, offense, quarterback, whatever the case may be, whatever you want to do, at 6, you are guaranteed to get a really strong talent. It's a very deep running back class. It's a really deep defensive class, defensive tackle class in particular, not a deep quarterback class. So for Field Yates, this is how he has 1 through 6. Travis Hunter, wide receiver, cornerback from Colorado, going number 1 to the Tennessee Titans. Abdul Carter, the edge rusher from Penn State, going to the Browns. First quarterback comes off the board at number 3. Cam Ward from Miami to the Giants. Then at 4, Will Campbell, offensive tackle, LSU to the Patriots. Number 5, Mason Graham, defensive tackle to Michigan, or from Michigan to the Jaguars. And at 6, Shedeur Sanders, quarterback, Colorado, landed with the Raiders. Any of those 6 are fine. All those players are quality players. You have some really good edge, defensive tackles, offensive line, a couple quarterbacks, and then obviously Travis Hunter, who's like a unicorn. All 6 of those guys are really good. And, as I had someone call in and chime in on my radio show, they said, Q, you know what it is? It's a copycat league. So now everyone just saw the Eagles mollywop the Chiefs by way of defense. So guess what the teams at the top of the draft are going to do? Probably try to load up on defense because, again, it's a copycat league. So Field Yates goes Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, Cam Ward, Will Campbell, Mason Graham, Shedeur Sanders. That was February 11th. Matt Miller from ESPN dropped his 2-round mock draft on February 3rd. He had at the top for the Tennessee Titans Abdul Carter. So you see where Abdul Carter was second to the Browns in Field Yates' mock draft. He's number 1 in Matt Miller's, and Travis Hunter is number 2. So they flip-flop spots. Titans get Abdul Carter, Browns get Travis Hunter. Cam Ward remains the same. First quarterback off the board to the G-men. Mason Graham, defensive tackle, Michigan, to the Patriots at 4. He is a stud. If the Raiders were to end up with Mason Graham at the defensive tackle position, all of a sudden you're cooking with grease. You've all of a sudden bolstered that defensive line in a major way. You've got Max Crosby, Christian Wilkins, Mason Graham, right, and other, right? Malcolm Kuntz, K'Lavon Chason, Tyree Wilson, whoever you choose to put at that other end. Number 5, Matt Miller has Will Johnson, the cornerback out of Michigan, to the Jaguars. I think that's a little high for him. But again, this was February 3rd. And Will Johnson is a really good cornerback. Took a little bit of a step back in 2024, but still a real good cornerback. Outside of Travis Hunter, I would say that he's probably quarterback 1. But Travis Hunter, you're getting a wide receiver and a cornerback. But Will Johnson has shown that he could be cornerback with number 1 in this draft, and then Shedeur Sanders at number 6 to the Raiders. You're seeing a theme here. Cam Ward, number 3 to the Giants, and Shedeur Sanders, number 6 to the Raiders in both Field Yates and Matt Miller's mock drafts. Then you've got Daniel Jeremiah from the NFL Network, who actually put his out first on January 26th. Abdul Carter, edge from Penn State to the Titans. Travis Hunter, wide receiver, cornerback, Colorado to the Browns. Again, Cam Ward, quarterback, Miami to the Giants. Will Campbell, offensive tackle, LSU to the Patriots. Mason Graham, defensive tackle, Michigan to the Jags. Shedeur Sanders, quarterback from Colorado to the Raiders. Again, the theme is there. So I know a lot of people are looking at the games that the Raiders won down the stretch. Why would you be picking at 6? There's no chance that you're going to get to a quarterback. Well, it looks like the consensus so far, at least with these 3 guys, is Cam Ward is quarterback number 1. And I think that he makes more sense for the Giants, and this is why. Not because I'm a Shedeur Sanders guy, but because Cam Ward is going to be playing outside in New York. And with that weather, I think you need to have a guy that has a stronger arm. Cam Ward, no doubt about it, has a stronger arm. He's the more athletic dude. He's the guy with the higher ceiling. There's no doubt about that. And that's why I've said I'm a Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders guy. I prefer Shedeur because I think that he would thrive in Las Vegas. I think he would do some really good things. I think you're going to get a consistent player out of him for a long time. But that's just me, right? I mean, look, we all have the right to our own opinion. But you can see consistently with these guys, 3 as a quarterback, 6 as a quarterback. 3 as a quarterback, 6 as a quarterback. 3 as a quarterback, 6 as a quarterback. And then they have these other guys, but they're all the same guys, right? Outside of Will Johnson, the cornerback from Michigan, and Matt Miller's mock draft, everybody is the same. So it looks like you're either going to get a really good edge rusher, a really good offensive lineman, possibly a defensive tackle. Like, none of those guys are bad options for the Raiders at 6. That's the reason why I'm bringing it up. Because no matter what you do, and the theme that people kept saying to us while we were on Radio Row in New Orleans is the Raiders just need really good players. They need dudes. Guess what? Hunter's a dude. Carter's a dude. Ward's a dude. Campbell's a dude. Graham's a dude. Sanders is a dude. All 6 of those cats are dudes. Right? So you're getting really good players. And I know that the draft is about more than just your first round pick. I know this. The Raiders have at least 10 picks right now. They need to get as many dudes, as many real deal consistent players as possible. They have talent on the roster. They just don't have depth behind the talent. They need to have talent, then they need to have talent behind the talent. That's what their job is. That's what John Spytek, Pete Carroll, everybody. That's what their job is going to be. Right? Champ Kelly, all those guys that are assisting putting this roster together, their job is going to be not only have top end talent, right? First string talent, but second, third string. You have to collect depth, right? Remember when the Seahawks were getting poached for all their guys every single year in free agency? Guess what? They had another dude coming down the pipeline. The Baltimore Ravens, you know what they do really well? They let guys walk. Guys can walk in free agency, and it's okay. You know why? Because they got another dude coming down the pipeline. The really good teams do that. They have really good dudes coming down the pipeline. So if they let a guy walk because it's going to cost too much to bring him back, that's fine. It's okay. You don't like to see top-notch talent leave, but if you have top-notch talent behind them, it lessens the blow. It makes it a lot easier. The Patriots, when they were really good, what were they famous for? They would let a guy go a year early as opposed to a year too late. Like Chandler Jones. Remember when they traded him to Arizona? Everyone's like, oh, my gosh, you traded Chandler Jones? What are you doing? Remember when the Patriots traded Richard Seymour to the Raiders? Wait, what are you doing? Right? And they let him go a year earlier than holding on to him a year too late. That's just what really good organizations, they tend to do. But just looking at all 3 of these guys' mock drafts, and look, it doesn't mean that this is exactly how it's going to go, but these are guys that I respect. These are guys that I know don't just pull something out their backside, throw it against the wall, and hope it sticks. So I'm just looking at all of these guys and realizing that any of these dudes could play for the Raiders and be an upgrade from an offensive tackle to a defensive tackle to an edge rusher, a wide receiver / cornerback, or a quarterback. The Raiders could use all those different positions, right? And that's the good thing. That's what I think is the positive about where they're sitting at number 6. So for everyone who says, well, you don't want to trade up because you don't want to have to give up a lot of draft capital, you probably don't have to. Honestly, you could probably pull what Tom Telesco did a season ago or a year ago and not trade up and sit at 13, and they ended up with Brock Bowers. Ended up being one of the best players in the draft. The Raiders could literally sit at 6 and guarantee that they'll get a really good player as long as they, select the right dude, right? Just because they're there doesn't mean that they're all going to be really quality. But looking at those 6 guys, I believe, just my personal feeling, that all of them are going to be really stinking good. We'll have so much to cover, so much ground to cover when it comes to the draft. But just want to kind of update you on what, the people that, like I said, I really respect are thinking when it comes to the NFL draft as it pertains to the silver and black. Very important draft, as most drafts are very important for the Raiders, right? They're not in that position yet where you just know, oh, yeah, they're going to be picking, in the late 20s or early 20s, and they're going to pick a really good player and going to add to the team. The Raiders are in that position. I'll be glad when they are, when the combine and the draft are not, priority number one for the silver and black, when you just could trust that, oh, yeah, they're going to pick some quality players because that's what they do consistently, and it's not a big to-do. Well, today is not that day. It's a big to-do right now. At some point, maybe they'll get there, but it's not yet. So they need to make sure that they do a really good job, a bang-out job when it comes to the draft coming up at the end of April. But all these 3 mock drafts are all very consistent, and, well, Shedeur Sanders landed to the Raiders in all 3 of them. I'm good with that. You might not be, but that's just how it shakes out, and it shows you that a quarterback definitely could fall to them at 6 if it plays out like any of these 3. That's what I got. What's on your mind? Your calls and texts are next as we close out the show. 707-654-4693. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about another great sponsor here on the show, and that is PrizePicks. Football season may be over. Basketball's in full swing. There's no better way to stay in the game than with PrizePicks. That's the best place for daily fantasy sports. With PrizePicks, you just pick more or less on at least 2 players' projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. You could take a look at a guy like Jason Tatum. You could look at a guy like Luka. You could be looking at a guy like Jimmy Butler. There's all kind of different player projections. Like for Tatum, more than 29 points. That's the best part. PrizePicks is quick and easy. You either pick, again, more or less. It's just that simple. Right now, download the app. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Let's try to hustle up through a couple of these. This text is from Raider Mike in Vegas. Hey, Q. It's Raider Mike in Vegas. My question is, if we don't get Sanders in the draft this year and get someone else, let's say day 2 that fits Chip Kelly and Pete Carroll's system, along with getting a vet in free agency that also fits, what do we do with Aiden O'Connell? Thanks for everything as always, Q. Raiders. That's Raider Mike in Vegas. And really good question. And the good thing about Pete Carroll, he loves competition. Think about Seattle. They had traded for a quarterback. They signed a quarterback in free agency in Matt Flynn, and then they drafted some short guy named Russell Wilson. Well, Russell Wilson ended up being the starter. Pete Carroll loves competition. So I say that to say Aiden O'Connell, I do believe, will be part of the competition. I do think that they'll go out and they'll get a veteran guy. I think that they'll get a bridge guy, not one that costs a lot of money, but just a bridge guy that they feel comfortable with starting the season. If so, in fact, he's the best guy for the job. Aiden O'Connell will compete for the job, and whatever rookie they're able to get, whether that's Shedeur Sanders in round 1, Cam Ward in round 1, Dylan Gabriel in round 2, right? Maybe Jackson Dart in round 2 if he makes it to round 2. Jalen Milroe, I know that name's hot out there. Like any of these dudes, I think there's going to be a full-fledged competition for who gets to start. I don't think any rookie's going to start. I know Tom Brady is very much against that. He said it before. But with Pete Carroll, as Russell Wilson started, if he earns the job in training camp, not just giving it to him because he was a high draft pick, but if he earns a job in training camp, I can see him getting the start. That'd be the only way. But the competition that Pete Carroll is going to put out there is a good thing. There's a reason why when the Raiders tweeted out that Pete Carroll was officially the head coach, they said it's time to compete. Compete. That was the C word. C-O-M-Pete. Compete. That's what they're going to do early, and that's what they're going to do often. Raider Mike, thanks so much for the text. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a call from TK Raider from Red Bluff, Cali. He's calling to talk about Josh Jacobs and the GM who messed up the deal. Here he is, TK Raider.
You. This is TK Raider from Red Bluff, California. I was listening to your radio podcast this morning, Locked On Raiders. You had mentioned that there's a fellow that called that said something about Tom Telesco letting Josh Jacobs go. And you said that you put that on Ziegler. Ziegler was gone, brother. Josh Jacobs was still there at the end of the 2003 season. And Telesco was the GM. They could have made a deal with Josh Jacobs. So that is on Telesco. Bad move by Telesco. Thank you, my brother. I listen to your show all the time, every day, all your podcasts, brother. Have a good day.
TK, thanks for the call. And yes, I said I put the Josh Jacobs situation and the fumble of the Josh Jacobs situation on Dave Ziegler instead of Telesco. And I realized Ziegler was gone, but as far as I'm concerned, the damage was done. And when you heard Josh Jacobs' interview on Friday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, that's who he was referring to. He was referring to Dave Ziegler and also Josh McDaniels. He wasn't talking about Tom Telesco, right? And those are the guys that offered him 3 for 30 and no added incentives that like he wanted. Telesco, and this is on him too, never even talked to Josh Jacobs. Before Telesco even talked to him, Josh Jacobs was gone to the Packers. So, yeah, I put that on Ziegler. I put that on McDaniels. And as anyone who knows that listens to this, I got a lot of respect for Dave Ziegler. He was a first-time GM. I think that he had a lot he was kind of hamstrung a little bit because of Josh McDaniels, but that's what happens, right? And it's on him, right? It's on him. It's on Josh McDaniels. That's who Josh Jacobs was talking about. That's why I said that I put it on Ziegler and McDaniels. I do realize that they were gone by the time Josh Jacobs left. But like I said, it was already like game, set, match when it was all said and done. Now, Telesco could have, called him up immediately and thrown a boatload of money at him, but that just wasn't going to be the way that Tom Telesco got down. But thanks for the call. I do appreciate you. Thanks for the compliments on the show. Up next, got a text from George, Jack Tatum Raider in the STL. Q, the Eagles built a dominant defensive line. They didn't worry about Jalen Carter's off-the-field situations. They hired him to play football. They consistently drafted, signed, and coached up quality defensive linemen. I would like to see that attitude at the Raiders. Why do I hear no one mention Ohio State quarterback Will Howard? Do people think he's not any good? I watch football. I don't evaluate talent professionally, so I'm going to let John Spytek and Pete Carroll do their job. I just hope that there's a concentration on the defensive line. Around the league, all the perennial playoff teams have productive or dominant front seven on defense. They also have a run game. So when you pass on Jalen Carter and you let Josh Jacobs walk, then you are not in it to win anything. Hopefully we're on the winning track now. Good job, Mr. Mark Davis, for having humility and always looking to do better. It doesn't always work out, but you can see he always has a plan and knows his own limitations. I think he's learned from his legendary father's shortcomings. Look forward to seeing what my team does to build the team for the future. Go Raiders. That's Georgia Jack Tatum, Raider in the STL. Thanks for the text. Definitely appreciate you. And yeah, we've talked about the Jalen Carter situation, and I know for a fact, that the Raiders really like Jalen Carter. The Raiders could not draft Jalen Carter. The situation that happened with Henry Ruggs was too fresh. I'm sorry. I know everyone doesn't respect that or even understand that. And I'm not saying you, but a lot of people have pushed back and said, it doesn't matter. He's a football player. It doesn't matter what happened off the field. No, it does. It does, especially in the community, right, where the Raiders are still trying to prove who they are in the community. It does matter. I'm sorry. It's just a bad situation. They weren't able to draft him. And if he didn't have that off-the-field situation with Georgia, guess what? He wouldn't have been available at number 7. He probably would have been the number 1 pick overall. Now, the Eagles and Howie Roseman, they have the ability to do that. Howie Roseman's been given the green light by the organization to go and draft the Jalen Carter and not worry about the off-field issues. He's been given the green light to go draft a cornerback that's coming off a torn ACL because he has a proven track record. But again, that situation just wasn't able to happen for the Raiders. Josh Jacobs, that's another conversation. We've had that. And Will Howard, I'm glad you brought him up. If there's one guy who knows about Will Howard, it's who? Chip Kelly, the Raiders' new offensive coordinator. So, yeah, no one is really talking about Will Howard right now, but all he did is win. At K-State for 3 years in the Big 12, he won. He went to Ohio State and won a national championship. So if there's anyone who knows Will Howard, it's Chip Kelly. And if he likes him and would like to work with him, I'm sure that he'll say, hey, guys, hey, there's this dude. Name's Will Howard. Just won a national championship with him. Let's go get him. So that's the good thing. You already have the inside track if you're the Raiders on Will Howard because of Chip Kelly. So he knows the good about him, he knows the bad about him, and he knows exactly what he can do with them. And what we saw him do on the biggest stage was win. So thanks so much for that text. I do appreciate you. Got time for a couple more. This call comes from Bo in the 530. He's calling to talk about Super Bowl 59 and has a draft question for me. Here he is, Bo in the 530.
Hey, what's up, Q? It's Bo from the 530, and I'm just calling to say, man, it sure was nice seeing Kansas City finally get their butts whooped. Also, I did have a question for you. Who are the top 5 players you see the Raiders getting in the draft, whether that be quarterback, receiver, defensive guy? Who are the top 5 players you're really taking a look at? Curious on your opinion on that. And that's all I got for you, Q. Love the show. Go Raiders.
Thanks so much for the call. And yeah, it was great to see the Chiefs get whooped. Some called the Super Bowl boring. I called it fantastic, right? Just seeing that kind of whooping, seeing the Eagles mollywop the Chiefs. Yeah, that was great. I loved it, right? It was like when Craig knocked out Debo on Friday, right? It's just like Debo was taking everybody's chains, stealing everybody's money, punking everybody, and Craig wasn't having no more and knocked him out. And that's exactly what the Eagles did. They were Craig and the Chiefs were Debo, and they went down. And then Smokey ran up to him and said, hey, Debo, you got knocked up. Well, you know, it's a family show, so I can't keep going. But you understand what I'm saying. And that's what they did. They got knocked the blank out by the Philadelphia Eagles. It was great to see. I loved every minute of it. As far as the draft goes, any of the top 6 guys that I talked about, right, the ones I talked about, segment number 2, those are all really great options. That's what excites me about this draft is that I feel like the Raiders, I don't want to say can't mess it up because we know that we've seen some things. We've heard some things, right? We heard Cleve Farrell drafted number 4 overall. Like, huh? What? Cleve Farrell? We've seen Alex Leatherwood drafted at number 17, right? We've seen some weird stuff before. I don't think that's going to happen this time around. I have confidence in the powers that be, the guys that are in charge of that. But we've seen some things. So, you know, I get it. Anything's possible. But those 6 that I talked about in segment number 2, by way of all 3 of those guys, Field Yates, Matt Miller, and Daniel Jeremiah's mock drafts, are all good as far as I'm concerned. And that helps the team get better immediately. Bo, thanks so much for the call. Appreciate you. Got a quick text from 360 Raider. Hey, Q, 360 Raider. I'm liking the coaching changes I'm seeing except for one. Edgar Bennett is no longer the Raiders wide receiver coach. That kind of sucks. Have a good one, Q. And yeah, 360 Raider, thanks for the text. It was wild, right, to see Edgar Bennett not be the wide receivers coach because he's been there for a long time through many different coaching staffs, right? From Gruden to McDaniels to Antonio Pierce. I mean, all these guys. But one of the things that I heard, you know, just being in the hallways at Raider Nation Radio 920 was that the staff that was coming in wanted to get rid of anyone that they felt like was in like a comfortable place, like was comfortable with where the Raiders were, like wasn't angry and upset where the Raiders were. You know, coaches and everybody that wanted to make sure that this team was great and not guys that kind of got caught in a rut. So maybe he's one that got caught in a rut, or maybe he just didn't fit with what the coaching staff wants. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to look at it, but yeah, Edgar Bennett, no longer the wide receiver coach for the Silver and Black. But thanks for the text. I do appreciate you. Let's see, 2 more. Eric the Rockin' Raider, he's up next. He's calling to talk about the quarterback position, the running back position, and also talked about last week on Radio Row in New Orleans. Here he is, Eric the Rockin' Raider out of Phoenix.
Hey, Q. Good morning. Eric the Rockin' Raider from Phoenix giving you a quick call. Just got done listening to today's show. Let me get that out. Great stuff, and also great stuff all last week from Radio Row. Absolutely enjoyed everything, including Josh Jacobs. Good stuff, Q. Anyway, 3 bullet point questions for you. One question nobody's talked about yet is Geno Smith as our potential bridge quarterback. He only has 1 year left with his deal in Seattle. Pete Carroll has familiarity. Why not Geno Smith? Q. Also, running back wise, everybody's talking about Ashton Gentry. I think we go defense with our first pick. But where around are you feeling that Cam Scapo from Arizona State might fall? That kid is looking a lot like a Christian McCaffrey type back. I think he's got the Raider mentality and would be a great fit for our team. Could you give us an idea where you think he might go and how we might end up with him, period? And finally, Q, last question. I think I might have forgot my last question, Q. All right, well, anyway, that's good for today. Great stuff as always. Eric the Rockin' Raider, out.
Thanks for the call. Thanks for the compliments on last week. It was fun. It was busy, but it was fun. And, of course, that Josh Jacobs interview I thought was great because of what he had to say. Not because of me, but what he had to say. Thought it was fantastic stuff. As far as Geno Smith, it's not my first or second choice, but Pete Carroll's had success with him. Got him a contract extension, right? So I can't say no. Maybe he's a bridge guy, but he's not my favorite guy. You know, I think Geno Smith was at his best when he was at West Virginia, but that's just me. As far as Cam Scatterbo goes, I don't think he's Christian McCaffrey-like. Not in my opinion. He's a tough, big downhill runner, right? He's a guy that can run between the tackles and be that bruising guy. I can see him being a part of a really good 1-2 punch. He's probably, in my opinion, like a third-round guy. This draft is very deep in running backs. Obviously, Ashton Genty will be a first-round guy, but Judkins and Henderson from Ohio State, I think those guys will be the next ones after Genty goes. Those dudes are dudes. And I already talked about Will Howard in Ohio State. Judkins and Henderson, both from Ohio State. I can see Chip Kelly saying, Hey, dudes, got another dude that I want you to get, Judkins or Henderson. They can run the rock. I need a running game to make my offense go. So, you can start to connect the dots with what the Raiders are doing. I would have no problem with that. And if they got Cam Scatterboo, I wouldn't have no problem with that either. Fantastic player. Dude is as strong as an ox. I mean, run downhill. He'll make some defensive players make some business decisions. I don't know if I want to get in front of that guy, right? Cam Scatterboo is fantastic. Part of the reason why Arizona State were the winners of the Big 12 and made it to the college football playoffs and made it to the second round and gave Texas a scare for their money. They had to buy the first week and then gave Texas a big time scare for their money. Man, they almost lost their lunch. They almost got their lunch taken away from them. So thanks so much for that. I do appreciate you. We'll close out with a text from Raider Al in Alaska. Q, you're thinking of Are You Still Down by John B. featuring Pac. My man John P. has to end all future calls in the podcast with Are You Still Down, Raider Nation. Man, imagine if Pac was still alive and we got to see him do a Super Bowl halftime show. Rest in peace, Tupac Shakur. That's Raider Al in Alaska. That's right. John B. was one of my favorites back in the day, man. Like I said, I used to call him the white baby face, man. That dude, he was smooth, wasn't he? Here we go. Let's hit that. All right, go ahead and hit that music, man. Yeah, we got to hit that Are You Still Down. I don't know. This is probably some kind of copyright thing. I'll probably get in trouble for it. But, man, you're right, man. That song was so smooth. They don't make them like this anymore. I sound like the old dude in the room now, right? They don't make it like this anymore. Back in my day, right? But, man, John B. was him, Babyface, all them cats, man. They used to run some things. So, hey, good call on that one. I do appreciate it. That's exactly what I was thinking of. Are You Still Down? John B. and Tupac. And we know the Raider Nation is still down. But, we're going to let this music ride on out as we close up the show. Thanks so much for that text. Definitely appreciate you. And that's going to do it for today's show. And full throttle, man, full steam ahead on the week of these shows and everything that's going on this offseason. I said it before, it's going to be a really busy offseason. Looking forward to it. And, of course, we're going to be here every single step of the way right here on the Locked On Raiders podcast to continue to, just document everything that's going on, have some good conversations, healthy conversations, draft conversations, whatever the case may be. We're here to do it. So thanks so much for all the feedback. Appreciate you checking out the show each and every day. Again, the show continues to grow each and every day, and that's because of you. Are you still down? Man, that goes so hard. Anyway, that's going to do it for today's show. Appreciate you, Raider Nation. As always, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.
Watch the sky, I make you smile, but you rather have what makes you cry. Say goodbye and I leave now. With my heart on my sleeve, memories down. What I found is you still care. You had feelings and they still there. Baby girl, keep it real here. Are you still down? Yeah, girl, it's so